Welcome to this British Bids podcast, which is launched at a time when British Bids releases a very important piece of research. I'm joined by Professor Chris Turner, who's Chief Exec of British Bids. Chris, tell me, what is the piece of research, but much more importantly, why in its 10-year history has British Bids released this right now?
Yes, these are important questions. I think the bid network is now robust and secure. I think when this coronavirus hit us, which was very early in the year, but didn't really impact us until March when things started going bad. And then suddenly from the sort of middle of March 23rd, for about 2 weeks, the world really changed dramatically. And I think there was a real concern at the time that bids were ill prepared, that we were probably flaky in terms of our finances, a nervousness that we weren't quite ready for it, and a concern that we didn't have a set of skills or enough time to get ready for what the future might be. And I suppose at the time, a huge worry about what that future might be. You know, it was all very uncertain. We still don't know totally, but at the time, it seemed a long time ago now, there really were great fears that the bid movement may not be robust enough to survive.
So the researchers looked at that through 3 different lenses, and I'm going to come back to bids right at the end if I can, because the important bits here are, what are our town and cities going to look like as we start to emerge from COVID-19, but also what will they look like in the longer term? And then what are consumers thinking? So let's do the town and city centres bit first. I found that really fascinating, but in a sense rather scary. I mean, the degree of change that the research has found is going to be necessary in town and city centres. I mean, this is sort of unlike anything we've ever seen before, isn't it?
I think that's absolutely right. And the nearest thing I can think of was what society went through as the Second World War came to an end, and we had these hugely blitzed cities and dramatic social changes. And I think we're at that level. I think the changes can be broken into a number of subgroups. There's the first 3 or 4 months. So as people come back, there'll be a sense of an attempt to make it like it used to be. And then round about Christmas time, and I think we'll be discovering that lots of our big businesses aren't coming back at all. A lot have gone under completely. There's a real change in the high street, and that will be noticeable, I think. And then what will then start emerging, and I think this will take us many months, if not, if I'm honest, 2 or 3 years to grasp, is that the social changes that this has stimulated will have long-term effects. I think people have enjoyed, for example, working from home. They've enjoyed not having to commute in. There are clearly worries about public transport and safety. So there'll be a greater number of people not coming into the middle of our towns, staying at home, working in smaller communities, working from home more often than they come into big offices. That's going to make a difference to some of our suburbs and our smaller towns. At the same time, not having this huge workforce coming into our big cities is going to affect those big cities. There are not going to be that lunchtime crowd, that evening crowd in the way we used to rely on them. So that's going to change. And at the same time, the big nationals will be rethinking the whole of their position. The cash flows and the profits coming from that smaller level of footfall will be just very different. Those that have survived this COVID crisis have discovered that multi-channel operation is the only way of delivering it. So they have been running powerful websites, great delivery systems. They will be able to open up their shops, but absolutely as shop windows to this powerful online delivery. So that's been one trend. At the same time, our locals have been also discovering the benefits of the internet. Small businesses that are shopkeepers selling flowers, selling cheese, selling delicatessens have suddenly discovered that they can work online in a way they never knew they could. We've also, all of us, discovered that Zoom works. I think the whole move toward the internet was something that people talked about a little bit. Why go to the office, green the world? But Zoom has worked. We've all got used to it. We're either Zooming or we're using Teams or we're using Skype, whole bundle of packages, but we just understand it now. And it is much cheaper to get 12 people together around a Zoom meeting than go off and have a long meeting in the middle of some big city. So all of those changes are happening simultaneously. We're not quite sure the impact of them. And at the same time, overlaying all of that is a nervousness that people have about security and safety, and a worry that this COVID thing will be around for really quite a long time in the way that measles is and flu is. We'll get used to it, we'll deal with it, but it's going to be there the whole time. So we're right on the cusp of some very big changes, and I don't think we know quite what the outcome is going to be, but we know it's going to be very, very different.
Well, we know it's going to be very profound, and the report makes it really, really clear that there's no way back to 12 or 13 weeks ago. You know, this is change that's going to happen. And when I was reading it, Chris, I was applying it to my own place and thinking, you know, good grief, how would I cope with that change? But actually, how could I make that change happen? And then I got to the end of the section, which is about town and city centres, which I say I found fascinating. But the kind of overarching conclusion is, you know, what should I do now? It's about adapt the way in which I work, isn't it? And working much more collaboratively and create a partnership that is brave enough to go on this journey in the future. That seemed to me to be the one thing I needed to do, was to create that local partnership to drive this change. Am I right?
I think that's exactly right. At multiple levels. I think individual shops, you know, as we open up in the next month, individual shops will discover that they have to share with each other, because if they've got long queues outside their shops, it's going to be messing up their competitors. And if the street they're in gets full of long queues, no one's going to go there because they'll get too frightened. So an individual shop will think, I must talk to my competitors next door to me, I must share things. At the same time, I think local authorities are realizing that they have to get close to all of their punters in their towns, whether it's businesses or residents, and again, share things. I think the whole process of people working more from home, people using their local 15-minute walk environment, which is becoming increasingly important. What Mary Porter's called the kindness economy emerging, people realizing that they were looked after in this lockdown, and they will continue to use the people that looked after them in their lockdown. Great stories all over the place about small businesses going the extra mile for people, and that will, I think, allow really much smaller communities to emerge. I think WhatsApp, for example, has been used by a lot of residents in streets to look after the old people, to deliver food. The whole WhatsApp community at a local level has become very strong. And I think shops and businesses are doing the same. They're using their own networks, and bids have become part of that, joining people up to make sure that, you know, independents in small towns have been having Zoom meetings with each other to make sure they've been claiming all their grants, to make sure that they know what signs they have to have in 2 weeks' time, to know how they manage their queues. Everyone's just talking to each other in a way they didn't do, as you say, only 12 or 13 weeks ago. The uncertainty is whether that continues. You know, the world moves quickly. People forget things. I'm very conscious of the great 2008 financial crash. Everyone said will never be the same again, and blow me, within 2 months it was pretty much the same again. I think this will be very different though, because I think that fear of catching nasty diseases will stop a lot of people doing things they've done intuitively, and that will make us all reflect, and life will become very different. I really do think it will, but it could become, if we're careful, positively different. You know, there'll be no international air travel. People will not go around the world because they can't afford it anymore. Therefore, they'll be having holidays more locally, holidays at home. We might see a revival of the Great British Seaside, you know, places that in bids we were talking to, in places like Hastings and Bournemouth and St Ives, are thinking, well, actually, maybe this will recur. People will come back again and have bucket and spade holidays. So there's lots of interesting things happening, as long as we don't get too ground down by the whole thing, because it can be very debilitating if we worry about what I call the grim side in the report.
Yeah, and if and to inform the what is the consumer thinking and how's the consumer change, you chose to do I noticed some telephone research, and you did it with a very substantial sample, actually 500 people who gave very lengthy interviews, and their words come through strongly in the report. You chose Nottingham as the place to do that. Tell me why Nottingham for a start.
A mixture of reasons. A, they got a very good bid. They've been in the bid community for a long time. They're a city pretty much bang in the middle of England. They're a city of a decent size, and yet they're not so big. They're not the Birminghams and Sheffield. I hate to say this, but they're not in that million plus size. They're a bit smaller than that. There are interesting suburbs around the edge of Nottingham that are interestingly differentiated, and therefore we wanted to have some, you know, interesting gentrified areas, and those are much more normal. Yeah. So we picked Nottingham. We also had a bid that we're very passionate about doing something, and therefore, as you say, we did a fairly in-depth study, 500 properly stratified, so we had a decent cross-section of under 18s and over 70s. We were keen to find out what the over 70s were thinking about this, and then some decent groups within that. And then we stratified clearly by age and by gender, and then they also broke it down into postcodes. So we have a bit of a sense, not strongly coming through the report, because we're doing a bit more work for Nottingham, of what those sub-communities are actually thinking about the world. And I think it was an interesting piece of work. I mean, you read it. I hope you found that interesting.
I did. I found it interesting, and then I was thinking, and I know you're going to do this. You've offered to do this as part of the research. You're going to present the very detailed findings of the consumer section, particularly to the board of the Nottingham bid, and I'm sure they will find the work that comes through fascinating. But there was one thing in there that I thought I would be a bit concerned if I was them, and I'm interested to see how you'd respond to this. 25% of the people you interviewed, which you say was across, you know, very wide age group and also across various postcodes, said that they intended to visit the city centre less frequently. So if that is replicated in other towns and cities across the country, and let's assume Nottingham is a you know, reasonable study to have used, and it is, what is the kind of stuff that we can do that's going to persuade that 25% to not make that decision and in the end come back as they were?
I think you put your finger on a really critical issue for the bid community. As you know, bids cover both city centres and also some of the suburbs. Birmingham's a nice example, 12 bids there, 5 in the middle, a group spun around the outside. And what this research is suggesting is that people will come into the middle of those cities less often, but will go to the smaller suburbs which they live in more often. Yeah. So there's that shift, that 15-minute idea we were talking about earlier. So if you've got a city like Birmingham with bids around the outside, then you suspect those suburban bids will become stronger in this process, and that the city centre bids will become differentiated in the process. And what the city centre bids probably will be is they will be the focal points of that bit of retail which people feel comfortable with, the bigger shops, the bigger places where you can have social distancing, you can queue, the big malls where the idea of gentle numbers of people coming in and out and slowly moving around is not anathema, where the footfall can be handled with care and managed with great, you know, sophistication. And you can see the big classy department stores, the Selfridges and the John Lewis's looking at this data and thinking, I will be reviewing the whole of my delivery in the way my store works, welcoming and so on. And the small suburbs, again, thinking, actually, people will be coming back to me. It's interesting, and I did a piece recently with a bid last night, and we were talking there about the things we really miss: shoe repairs, dry cleaning, batteries back in your watches, those technical things we've not had at all. We're not going to go to the middle of town for that now. We'll probably pop around the corner and get it done in a local shop, and probably happily pay a bit more for that. We're not worrying about our transport costs. We're not worrying about our petrol or our car parking. We'll walk around the corner and we will get all those things done more locally. So I think there's going to be interesting changes. In Bill Grimsey's book, one of his early ones, he writes about as a child going down a high street with his mum doing the shopping and popping in and out of 4 or 5 different shops and choosing different things from different shops. There is a possibility we might be returning to that sort of smaller, more nurturing, as I say, the kindness economy that Mary talks about, and moving away from some of that big stuff. But again, I have to say, this is absolutely still supposition. We don't quite know what it's really going to be like. And I think we'll look back in, probably, if I'm honest, 5 years' time, and look back and say, this is when those big changes happened. We weren't aware of it happening. We think they're going to be happening, but we're not quite sure what it's going to end up being like. And I think for many of us, it's a very exciting time.
So the final strand then looked at how prepared, if at all, are bids to cope with this this period of change and this period of challenge. And you know, I'm sure I speak for most bids. This has been a troubling, concerning time. I think most would say thank you to you and thank you to those you work with in terms of the Bid Resilience Fund, which has given us some cash to keep us going. But underlyingly, you've done a very deep dive into the bid industry in terms of its financial resilience, its resilience around resource, but also its preparedness to move forward. So I suppose that it's a huge question, this, but let me ask it and then see where we get to. How prepared is the industry to deal with this, Chris?
If I'm honest, far better than I thought. I mean, we started this with a great worry that there would not be enough money in bids to survive even 6 weeks. Having done this work, I feel very confident that the bids have come through this first phase, and this is the first phase, with far better resilience than we ever thought. They had more reserves than we thought they had, and that's been interesting. Bids have been very prudent on their reserves. They have got more levy money coming in than they thought. You know, bids talking about 30 to 40%. I was talking to one recently, she was saying 27%. That's after 3 months of levy payment. Now that won't do big things, but it does mean that we are surviving. So I think broadly the bids have been surviving. I think the other good story has been that local government has been phenomenally supportive. One or two bad stories of difficulty and problems, but on the whole, the local authorities have been great. They've understood the bid model. And central government's been great. They've understood. They realise that bids are going to be important. They put a bit of operational money in to help us through. So I think most of us have come through this really difficult first phase. A few will go under, sadly and tragically. The ones that didn't have the reserves, the ones whose local authority are not being supported, and we will have to look to a few going, and that's going to be very difficult for many of us because there will be bids that we've grown to know and love. But on the whole, we've come through. I think the key thing, though, is what happens next. Talking to some bid managers across the country the last couple of weeks, is very clear that it's actually Q2 that's going to be the critical one. Q1 we've come through, we've survived that. Q2 is the big issue. Q2, because what we normally do in Q2 is start planning the big events, the headline acts that keep bids going, that allow our members to think these guys are doing the right thing. A lot of that's events. A lot of that is the whole recreational, experiential economy. And of course, that's the thing we can't do, because at the moment, the whole COVID thing is stopping us sorting out events and big gatherings. So we're all having to rapidly rethink what that experiential process is going to be. And that lots of stuff's coming out. It's really quite interesting. Apps, shared food space, exciting signposting, flowers on the pavements to allow people to see how they get through the town, interesting little artificial intelligence circles around people, so as they walk around, they get a little circle around them so they know what 2 meters is like. So bids are doing some really interesting experimental stuff, and they're starting to think for the future. What will the Christmas light turn on be like? It clearly will have to be very exciting, but clearly we can't have 3,000 people crammed into a small square, or in some cases 10,000 people. So we've got to do different things. So it's going to be virtual, there's going to be a lot more video stuff, we're going to be using the whole, you know, kids are having parties now on their TV screens, apps which allow 25 children and kids to have rock and roll parties all over the country, gathering together in a very virtual sense. We'll be doing the same. So bids are looking very differently at how we handle it. Lovely story I had last night from a bid where they have basically hired a van to deliver everything from all their independents. They know that people are not coming into shop, so they've got a van, they're charging £400 a week for the van, and the guy's delivering £5,000 worth of gear every week out to all the bid levy payers. So bids are doing innovative, exciting things, and Q2 is going to be the challenge, because A, we need our levy money in, and local authorities must collect it. And the levy money will only come in, I think, if we do a very good job and our levy payers keep on paying. So there's some interesting, exciting challenges for us. We've got to rise to the occasion. I'll end with one tiny bit on this, which was that at the end of all these, we had a lot of focus groups. And I put the question to each one about, how do you feel about it? And all of them, the bid managers said, we are resilient, agile people. We come into the bid industry because we're characters that want to make things happen. And that was the bit that really came across to me. These were characters, and we saw about 45, 50 of them. These are characters that want this to work, and they're grabbing every opportunity, and they are making it work. And that's exciting. And that's why the whole bid industry is good.
Isn't that what makes working in this industry so fascinating and so thrilling, Chris?
Absolutely, absolutely. The sharedness. The thing I've enjoyed is that we've been running, British Bids, ATCM, all of us have been running conferences and events, and bid managers have been going to all of them. We've been sharing things, we've been gossiping, we've been ringing each other up. As stuff's come out about things on the pavements, about flowers, about signs, about posters, everyone's been sharing them, pushing them around. There's been that real sense of a community, and there's about 260 bids in England, and that community has been coming together. The Welsh bids have been doing stuff in a very shared fashion. We know the Scottish have as well. So the bids have been coming together in a very, very purposive and very enthusiastic manner. It fills your heart really at times to see people lifting their game. It's been amazing.
It does. Well, look, in conclusion, thank you for all the work that you've done on this and for pulling this, what I think is a fantastic piece of work, but so important at this particular stage. I'm sure that bids up and down the country will A, enjoy reading it, but B, learn from it. I think I'm very lucky that I got the first interview because I got the sneak preview of this, but I'm sure you'll be in demand over the next few days and weeks in terms of your interpretations of the findings. But for the meantime, Professor Chris Turner, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much indeed. Thank you so much. And thanks for your help on all of this.